Administering software update issues. As a Windows desktop support technician, and even more so as a Windows systems administrator, we want to do everything we can to manage that counterbalance between, on one hand, making sure all of the software on our users' workstations is up to date, while on the other hand, mediating against incompatibilities that are simply a way of life when you have several different software installations from several different manufacturers on a single machine. The topics in this nugget include the following. We'll start with how to verify software update status in Windows 7. As you've come to expect, we're going to concentrate primarily on first-party software here, namely the Microsoft Windows operating system updates and for updates for additional Microsoft products that may be installed on the workstation. We'll then take a look a little more detail on automatic update and the different ways that we can ensure that our users are receiving those software updates on a time-effective and security-effective basis. And third, what are some practical strategies for troubleshooting update incompatibilities? Let's get started. First, there's the question, where do we go in Windows 7 to verify the current update level of the system software? Earlier in this Nugget series, in particular when we were discussing security vulnerabilities, I introduced you to the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer tool. This is a vulnerability scanner that will come back with a detailed report on any hot fixes, service packs, or additional updates that are missing on that target workstation. When we're working directly with the workstation, there's a couple different control panels we can visit to inventory software update status. Of course, our home base is the Windows Update control panel, which has come a long way since, say, Windows XP. Windows Vista introduced a complete rewrite of Windows Update Client, and that carries forward even more so into Windows 7. Another control panel we can look at is the Programs and Features control panel. This control panel by default gives us a list of first and third-party software applications that are installed. However, we can also view updates that have come down from, say, Microsoft Update's website. Just as importantly, if we discover an incompatibility with an update, we can roll back an update by uninstalling it. One of the neat things that Microsoft did in their update of Windows Update, pardon the word repetition there, is that now updates are classified in one of four different properties. We have the important category, the recommended category, the optional category, and the featured category. Of the four of these, perhaps the most crucial are updates that come down from Microsoft that are marked important. These, more often than not, are critical updates that deal with the security of the target machine. You may have heard the expression or the term zero-day or O-day exploits. A zero-day exploit is an exploit that can compromise a system. In many cases, you'll find that zero-day exploits deal with remote administration of a system or the ability to remotely crash a system. But what separates an O-day or zero-day exploit from an older one is that as of the zero-day status, zero-day means immediate. There's nothing from Microsoft in this case to obviate or correct that exploit. So you want to definitely pay attention to key websites out there. Microsoft has their own security site, and there are other important ones too that you should be looking at each day, because as these zero-day exploits pop up, there's always that scary gap in between when the exploit pops up in the wild and it's officially recognized, and then when Microsoft releases a security update that patches that hole. We already learned earlier in this training that the second Tuesday of each month is Microsoft's announced software update cycle. Now, why do you think Microsoft publishes that they release their non-zero-day fixes on the second Tuesday of every month? Well, the answer to that question is so systems administrators know in advance when to expect a new batch of updates from Microsoft so they can plan their testing and release of those updates accordingly. Of course, you often have, especially now more than ever in 2010, what are called out-of-band updates that come down from Microsoft. These almost always are fixes to address the zero-day exploits. Recommended updates are not as crucial by any means as important updates, but nonetheless they should not be overlooked. An example of a recommended update would be a definition update for Windows Defender or Microsoft Security Essentials. We've already discussed the crucial importance of you keeping your anti-malware tools up to date with those definitions. A third classification is optional. These are updates that are by no means required but give additional functionality in Windows. An example of an optional update is the Microsoft Silverlight technology. If you're not familiar with Silverlight, Silverlight is a multimedia platform that competes directly with Adobe Flash. And then finally we have the featured category. Featured is going to be a roll-up of hotfixes. And if we haven't already discussed that, a hotfix is some code meant to address or patch a specific bug or vulnerability. Periodically, Microsoft will issue a roll-up, which is a precompiled package of a number of hotfixes that have been recently released. And then on a more distant basis, perhaps every year, couple years, sometimes even longer, Microsoft will take hotfixes, roll-ups, and new features, put those all together in a featured release. This would be something like a service pack or just a new version of, say, what the web browser, Internet Explorer 8, was deployed as a featured update type. Windows 7, how can we update thee? Let us count the ways. The least effective way to handle client updates is manually. This would only be a valid way to configure updates in the smallest of business networks, perhaps a small office, home office, or SOHO, or simply a mom and pop shop that neither has the expertise nor the money nor the time to configure automatic updates using a technology like Windows Server Update Services, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Manual means we simply open the Windows Update control panel and we configure the machine to automatically download and perhaps even automatically install updates. Simple as that. Now in business, for all intents and purposes, we want this update to be hands-off or as automatic as possible for the previous reasons, chiefly to enhance the stability and the security of our client systems. Of course, there's a caveat to that, and that is, what if we wind up breaking functionality on one or more of our users' computers by just letting updates run amok? Therefore, Microsoft has given us a couple really neat options to more tightly control how Windows updates come down to our users' machines. Now, local means just on a machine-by-machine basis, say a work group, you make sure that the Windows Update control panel is set for automatic operation. That's all she wrote. Incidentally, Windows updates run by default in their own process under their own security context, so you don't have to worry about the elevated or administrator token. In other words, a standard user can be on the machine while in the background Windows Update is downloading and installing patches and other software from the Microsoft site. Now, these two guys right here, WSUS 3.0 and SCCM, are the enterprise answers. WSUS is free, SCCM is quite a bit of money for fully automating Windows Update and controlling it. First, let's look at WSUS. We're going to actually cover WSUS configuration in the upcoming demo. WSUS used to be called Windows Software Update Service. Now it is Windows Server Update Service. It's called WSUS. And the take-home message with WSUS is that this is a Windows Server 2008 role. You can also install it on Server 03, of course, in which, in its most simple implementation, you have a single server box that's running the WSUS role, and in your enterprise, it is the only machine that actually goes out onto the internet and pulls down updates from the Windows Update site. All of your internal machines inside your network, and this could be servers, that is to say computers running Windows Server, as well as client machines running 7, Vista, or XP, all these machines are configured through group policy to query and download Windows updates from a local WSUS server. I hope right off the bat you see some neat advantages there. Number one is going to be the cost savings in terms of bandwidth. Instead of all of your client machines individually going out onto the internet and pulling down Windows updates, some of which are pretty sizable, especially service packs, we're operating at say 100 megabits per second on our local LAN. So that polling download process is going to happen much more efficiently, isn't it? Now, the second and just as important, if not more important benefit of using WSUS is that you as a domain administrator can screen those updates and determine how they're deployed. That is to say, you can run testing on some reference workstations and then determine, well, I'm going to release this particular update to this group of computers over here, but this other group that's, say, running a line of business application that's incompatible with that update will not receive that update, you see? Consequently, for a network of any size, WSUS is really a must. Now, you can kick things up a notch, actually several notches, by using Microsoft's enterprise product, System Center Configuration Manager. Now, SCCM does a whole lot, actually. You can use it to deploy operating systems, for heaven's sake. But in our context here of doing software updates, SCCM not only does everything WSUS does, it actually works in conjunction with WSUS to deploy Windows updates, but you can actually control other software as well. So you can manage, say, third-party software and handle patch management with those products in an automated fashion, you see. So there's the upsell or the benefit of using a product like SCCM. The final thing on this whiteboard I want to talk to you about is Microsoft Update versus Windows Update. Originally, Microsoft's website was called Windows Update, and then gradually they started rolling in this additional feature called Microsoft Update. Now, as of Windows Vista, if you're using the Windows Update control panel, it's just a checkbox. If you're going out onto the web and using the browser, you'll first hit Windows Update, and then you'll be asked if you want to update other Microsoft products, and you can download an ActiveX control to give you the Microsoft Update functionality. Now, the key and the difference here is the first letter. Windows Update, Microsoft Update. Windows Update will update only Windows operating system software. Microsoft Update will also pull down fixes, patches, etc. for other Microsoft software. Now, this could be enterprise software like SQL Server, Visual Studio, SharePoint, Exchange for server machines, but also client-side applications like, say, SQL Server Express, Visual Studio Developer Edition, and specifically the Microsoft Office Suite. So I wanted to be sure that we covered that because that distinction between Windows Update and Microsoft Update often hangs some systems administrators up in some confusion. Although on one hand, it's ironic, on the other hand, if you've had experience using Windows Update in a business environment, you have seen updates actually break applications or maybe hose up the entire operating system on the target machine. And of course, that's ironic because you would think that anything coming down from Microsoft through Windows Update / Microsoft Update will do nothing but accentuate the target operating system and or first-party applications. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Sometimes things break. In my personal experience, it tends to be line of business applications, either homegrown apps within the organization or third-party enterprise client-side apps that for some reason maybe a DLL is replaced by a Windows Update, and that creates an incompatibility. Windows Update might update a driver that the line of business relies upon. Again, that causes an incompatibility. It happens, bottom line. So in terms of troubleshooting the updates, the best thing to do is to test those updates before you deploy them to your users. WSUS makes it easy to do this because, number one, I actually have these reversed. You can create computer groups. So you can create, say, a testing computer group and assign your testing workstation or workstations to that group, and then you can create another group for your user population or several groups depending upon how granular you want to do things. And then in WSUS you can selectively approve updates. So the idea is that you would approve updates to your testing group, run your tests, and based on the results of those tests, decide whether you want to approve the updates for the rest of your population. Now, sometimes you either don't have WSUS or you don't use it, whatever the case may be. I know we're busy. Windows systems administrators tend to be juggling many objects simultaneously. It's just the nature of the job. What happens if you do wind up with a conflict? Well, Windows Update as of Windows 7 has some built-in troubleshooters, such that on the front end of things, during installation, if an update fails, the user can kick off a troubleshooter and work through this in conjunction with you, the DST. After installation, if the Windows Update is successful, but then there's a compatibility problem such that your application's no longer functioning, what can you do then? Really, I would suggest a two-prong approach. First, check the web, check the vendor's website, and by vendor I mean not only Microsoft to see if they're aware of the incompatibility, but also the vendor of the app or service that's having trouble. See what you can find out there. Worst case scenario, although sometimes you'll want to do this on the front end in order to quickly restore service to the affected user or users, uninstall the update that's caused the problem. Now, of course, that introduces another fork in the road in terms of how do you know which Windows update caused the problem. Well, what I do in my experience is that I'll open up the Programs and Features or the Windows Update Control Panel. I like Programs and Features because you can uninstall right there. And you can quick sort those updates in descending order to see which update or updates came most recently. So the idea is we want to isolate what update or updates were installed that immediately after we had the failure. You see what I'm saying? So we would discuss this with the user. When did you first see the application problem crop up, etc., and get a nice date and time if possible, and then selectively uninstall those updates, reboot, and let's see what happens. In our demonstration, we're first going to look at methods for inventorying and controlling updates on a Windows 7 machine. We'll then do some mixed client-server configuration. I'll show you how WSUS is set up on a Windows Server 2008 R2 machine, as well as how that group policy affects the client experience. Alrighty then, in this demo we're looking at Windows Update and Software Update functionality in Windows 7. To start with, why don't we pop into our search box and type Windows Up to invoke the Windows Update Control Panel. And although we've been here before earlier in the course, now it's time for a formal walkthrough. You'll see Windows Update as part of the System and Security group in Control Panel. And as we discussed in the whiteboard portion of the course, updates are now categorized. You'll see this system here has recently done a check, and we have 2 important updates available and 3 optional. And we can give those links a click to see specifically what's going on. Windows Update has never been more verbose and interactive. You'll note that we can select each one of these and read over on the right a description of what is changed or what is new based on that update. The optional category, you'll recall, are going to be truly optional things like Silverlight, Office Live, Windows Live Essentials. Good deal. And we can go back using our back button and notice that in order to manually install these updates requires an administrative elevation. If we go over to the left on the task area, we can manually invoke an update check. We can change settings, we can view update history, we can restore hidden updates, and then there's a frequently asked questions link. Let's go to view update history, and this is where we're going to get a nice run. You can do an inverse sort on date installed, you can do a sort based on the importance category. I like to look at date installed descending to see what's been installed most recently. You can right click these guys to view details or copy details out to the clipboard. Again, I just can't speak highly enough about how well Microsoft did in annotating exactly what's happening with Windows Update here. You'll notice that we cannot uninstall an update from the Windows Update Control Panel. We can simply see what's there. And in terms of installing updates, if you don't want to be bothered with a specific update anymore, you can right-click and choose Hide Update. Notice that that's an administrative option, and then it goes gray. This means that any future runs of Windows Update will not pick up that the system does not have, at least in my case, the Office Live add-in. So that's the basic deal with Windows Update. You can see what's there, you can run a manual check, view update history to get a lot of good metadata about your updates, if not the ability to uninstall them. While we're here and before we go to Programs and Settings, why don't we go into Change Settings to see what's going on as far as manual client-side configuration of Windows Update. First, we have this category for important updates. You'll note that we have a separation between important and recommended. The recommended option by Microsoft for important updates, of course, is to not only download them but install them automatically. We can download updates but let me choose whether to install them, check for updates but let me choose whether to download and install them, or just to turn off Windows Update, which I agree with Microsoft is not recommended. I'm going to change this for now to download updates but let me choose whether to install them. If you do choose the recommended option, you can customize when the installation takes place to minimize interruption. Now, as you're going to see shortly, all of these client-side options are nice. They give you really nice control, but as a domain administrator, you certainly don't want to be twiddling these options on a computer-by-computer basis. Even more importantly, we do not want our users to come in here on their own and twiddle these options. So what we're building up to is using group policy in order to deploy and troubleshoot Windows Update. Now remember I mentioned the Microsoft Update thing, the difference between Windows Update and Microsoft Update. For recommended updates, give me recommended updates the same way I receive important. This is going to determine scoping. Who can install updates? By default, all users can install updates on the computer. Here's a link specifically for Microsoft Updates that says give me updates for Microsoft products and check for new optional Microsoft software when I update Windows. And then there's a software notifications option. Show me detailed notifications when new Microsoft software is available. Good and good. Let me just come back one final time to make sure we haven't missed anything. I think that's it. Now let's return to the search box and we're going to open up Programs and Features. You'll recall this is our control panel where we can inventory first and third party software. We can select an item and uninstall it if we want to. If we want to look at Windows updates, we can come over to the task area, choose View Installed Updates. Yet again, we can double click the Installed On field to do an inverse sort on that. If we right click one of these, you'll notice it's just a single option to uninstall. So basically your Windows Update control panel is where you go for metadata and for learning. Programs and Features is where you go to uninstall if need be. Alright, so right now this machine, WinNugget, is operating in a work group. It's separate from Active Directory, so as you just saw, all administration with regard to automatic updating is done on a per machine basis. Why don't we right click Computer, go to Properties to open the System Control Panel. Under Computer Name, let's click Change Settings. Of course, I am logged on as an administrator, otherwise I wouldn't be able to access these without specific elevation. And on the computer name page of System Properties, let's change up our workgroup membership and join the NuggetLab.2 domain. I'll authenticate as a domain administrator, as you see here, and we'll go ahead and join the NuggetLab.2 domain. And this is going to be important, obviously, because we want to pick up group policy settings from the domain controller. So at this point, I'm going to restart the client box, and we'll shift our focus to DC Nugget 2, our domain controller. We are on DC Nugget 2. This is a domain controller in the NuggetLab2.com Active Directory domain. This server is running Windows Server 2008 R2. Release 2. And as you see, I have a custom MMC console up that includes, among other things, the Group Policy Management snap-in, and I've expanded the domain and I'm editing the default domain policy. This is just to show you where we control Windows Update settings in the Group Policy Editor. The path that we're interested in Group Policy is Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and then if we scroll all the way to the bottom, you see Windows Update. Now let's stretch the screen to give ourselves some room to move here, and you see I've already enabled some policies. These are the core ones. First we have Configure Automatic Updates, and basically this supplies the settings for affected computers with regard to their Windows Update settings. Remember the automatic update setting? Auto download and notify, auto download and schedule the install, etc. I put that on auto download and notify, and then you've got a refresh interval here. The most important one, if you're using WSUS, which I am on this server, is the Specify Intranet Microsoft Update Service Location policy. And basically what you're doing here is enabling the policy and then pointing your clients who receive this policy to your WSUS server. And that's traditionally given as an HTTP URL, and I'm pointing them to DC Nugget 2. Intranet Statistics Server, this is important if you're interested in looking at the pretty pictures or charts and graphs and numeric statistics that are generated by WSUS, which we are. Automatic Update Detection Frequency, I set that to check every hour. That's obviously pretty aggressive. If you look at the other policies, you see basically you can control any aspect and every aspect of Windows Update. You can delay restart after installation completes, turn on recommended updates. In fact, I'm going to set that right now. Turn on software notifications, allow non-administrators to receive update notifications. I'll enable that. Really great stuff. Of course, we have to remember always when we make a change to group policy, we want to open an elevated command prompt. and run a GP update to force that policy out through the domain again. Alright, so much for group policy. Whoops, I don't want to leave this console because the other aspect of this console, or the other snap-in I should say, is called update services. And what that really points to is Windows Server Update Services, or WSUS. I wanted to just briefly walk you through how you set up a server, at least a Windows Server 2008 box, as a WSUS server. As you see here, WSUS is a role. So what you want to do is add the role in. Now, depending upon the specific edition of Windows Server 2008 that you have, for instance, whether you have R2 or not, you'll see the option here, Windows Server Update Services, and I found that the installation failed the first time through. Windows Server Update Services relies upon SQL Server, a very compact portable version for a database for storage of metadata and storage of your configuration settings. And if you don't already have the Internet Information Services IIS web server installed, WSUS will install that as well, because even though we don't manage WSUS via a web browser anymore, it hasn't been the case for a few years. As you saw in the group policy, we still have the HTTP path that clients use to query the server. So what I had to do actually is I went through this role wizard and installed at least the IIS, at least the SQL Server. I'm going to cancel the wizard, yes. Then I had to go out to Microsoft.com and I manually downloaded and ran the installer for WSUS 3.0 Service Pack 2, and that went just well. It went swimmingly, and at the end of that process, WSUS showed up in Server Manager and all was good. I also needed to download and install another free product from Microsoft called the Visual Studio Report 2008. It's a report viewer 2008 redistributable package, and unfortunately I had to install that separately prior to installing WSUS 3. After all that monkey business, you wind up with an administrative tool shortcut for Windows Server Update Services, but as I said, I included this in the MMC console, and away we go. Now, this isn't all about server configuration, but if you haven't already picked this up in context, you can reasonably expect to see quite a bit of questions on your 7685 exam that deal with group policy and deal with Windows Server 2008 R2 specific functionality. Therefore, the time that I'm spending here on the server side isn't just me trying to toot my own horn. It's to get you as prepared as possible for the live exam. Basically what you have here with synchronization, you can synchronize the WSUS's local content, local downloaded content, with what's on the Microsoft servers. If we go into updates, you can filter these based on security updates, critical updates, or all updates, and you can filter based on their approval status or just status in general. This is especially helpful to look at, say, failed updates. I'm going to choose any here and then refresh so we can see the list. Let me pick out some Windows 7 specific updates. Just parenthetically, I'll say you want to be sure that you're only synchronizing updates for your language. That's going to save yourself some disk space on your WSUS server, and you can also be selective as to which OS versions that you're downloading as well. So you notice that when you select one of these updates, you see some metadata down below, and it gives you some really nice, this is where the Visual Studio Report Viewer 2008 stuff comes in, and where the statistics gathering is important. You can see and click links where computers have this installed, or computers with no status, computers needing this update, and so forth. You can right-click to approve or decline the update. I'm going to approve this one. And when you approve an update, remember I mentioned you can create computer groups? Well, by default, all computers in your domain are assigned to this unassigned computers group. The idea is you would create additional computer groups and add those or target those computers to their group so that you can be more selective in your approval. When you approve, you can approve for install, you can allow removal, or not approved. I'm going to mark these for install and click OK. To complete this demo, we're back on WinNugget. I've joined the NuggetLab2.com Active Directory domain, and if we fire up Windows Update, we see now Windows is up to date as of the updates that are currently approved on my WSUS server. Now, the biggest difference that you see here in between WSUS client configuration and what we saw in a workgroup environment is that you see notifications, for instance. You receive updates managed by your system administrator, and when you click Check Updates Online from Microsoft Update, instead of firing up a web browser and actually going out to the Microsoft website, you'll see it says Check for Updates Managed by your system administrator. And so now I'm querying the WSUS server instead of Microsoft. Also, if we go to Change Settings, you'll see this information bar that says some settings are managed by your system administrator, and because I haven't disabled these options, I can untick them. Of course, if I'm a standard user, I won't be able to make that change persistent. You'll notice that the OK button is protected by a UAC shield. You'll recall I did set the important updates condition to download updates, but let me choose when to install them, and you'll notice that control is read-only because that setting's being managed by group policy. So there you have it. Administering software update issues review. In this nugget, we spent quite a bit of time learning the ins and outs, rubber meets the road, practical aspects of keeping our client machines, and for that matter, even our server machines, up to date with respect to their Windows updates. I showed you how to verify software update status in Windows 7. We looked at all of the fine details of configuring the Windows Update control panel, including automatic updates, and paying particular attention actually to automating this process on an enterprise level with WSUS 3.0. And then I gave you some practical strategies for troubleshooting update incompatibilities. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.